I would say there are a few things to disambiguate in this regard. The first one is that we have developed this way of seeing the world, right? This scientific way of seeing the world. And it's this scientific way of describing the world has leaked into all kinds of fields, including history. So we have this idea that in some ways history is a kind of scientific method that you analyze facts and you kind of see what happened almost like in a forensic manner, like a policeman would analyze a crime scene, and that is what is real, and I think that is a mistake. It's a mistake to think that is the most real thing. Because the world is a joining of meaning and, let's say, potential or facts, we could say it that way. Like it's a joining of facts and meaning. The idea that the reality that's the closest to the most precise facts is the most real is not true, because it's always towards purpose, right? So if I have the purpose of telling my wife that I'm going to buy some milk at the store, I will not describe every street I'm going to turn on. And I'm not going to describe like every step that I'm going to make and how I'm going to tie my shoes and how I'm going to, like, I could stretch that description forever because I'm going to do a million things before I come back with the milk from the store, But the idea that the most real one is the one that's closest to the details, that's absolute nonsense.
Right.
It's always towards purpose. And so if I just tell my wife, I'm going to the store to get milk, I'll be back in 15 minutes. It's like, that's the most real description of that event in that moment because it's the one that is closest to the reason why I'm saying it in the first place.
Right.
And so that is how we have to understand the text in Genesis. The text in Genesis is describing an event. It is describing something that happened. It is describing the origin of everything. That's really hard to describe. And it's doing it in the best way that you can describe the origin of everything. And everything in that text can be taken absolutely seriously and should be taken seriously. But is it a scientific description? No. Why should it be? We only are offended by the idea that it's not a scientific description if we believe in this weird idea that scientific descriptions are somehow the most real things ever.
Right.
And so this is the thing we kind of have to break in our minds, which is it's not about disrespecting the text. It's not about saying, these old mythological things, we don't care about that. We believe in evolution or whatever. It's like, no, this text is describing the best way to understand, first of all, not only the origin of the world, but the origin of any world.
That's right.
The origin of anything that you recognize as being one. The description that's there in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is the best way to understand it.
Right.
Therefore, it's the best way to understand the church. It's the best way to understand your family. It's the best way to understand your nation. It's the best way to understand anything that has unity and that moves into multiplicity. Because God has given us a description of the origin of all things that is the most succinct and powerful description ever. And so it is infinitely powerful, this story. And we have to treat it with that. And the danger of wanting to reduce it to some mechanical thing, like to want to make it into some scientific description, is you can be blind to what it's actually saying. You can be blind to the power that it has to become a beacon for your life and for the church and for anything that you're looking at.
You're emptying it from its value.
Yeah, you're making it like, it's as if you're saying that this story, that's like the story of the origin of everything, is equivalent to like how I ask the cashier at Tim Hortons, like, to put 2 creams in my coffee. It's like, no, there are different levels of reality. Like,
Absolutely.
there are different ways to describe the world. And when you get to these very, very peak descriptions, then the language cannot be the same as the mundane world. And that's why, the text in Genesis, in some ways, it transgresses our normal categories, because you can't talk about the origin of reality without using analogy. That is absolutely necessary. There's no way else to do it. And you see it because even the scientists have to do that. Even the scientists, when they talk about their kind of imagistic or image of the origin of the reality, when they talk about the Big Bang, it's like, they don't believe that there's a big explosion somewhere in space. That's not what that means. But there's no way to talk about fundamental things without using analogy. And scripture does that, but does it in such a powerful way that it ends up applying perfectly almost to anything.
Right.
So analyzing it is extremely useful in understanding our life, like I said, the church, anything.
And what I find paradoxical is that we sometimes forget when having these conversations with people who really want to only interpret things from that perspective of what is real, what is factual, is that when reading the very same scripture, you discover that even Christ uses analogy to be able to describe what is indescribable. How many analogies does he give when he talks about the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah.
Or even when he speaks about who he is and talking about he's the good shepherd, he is the door, he is the bread of life. And nobody would argue that he means that in the simplistic, factual, literal understanding that people...
Like in this kind of reductionist way. My favorite example of Christ, which actually I think cuts through so much of this, is the example of St. John the foreigner, St. John the Baptist, right? And so there's a prophecy in the Old Testament that says that Elijah will come before the Messiah. And so the disciples ask Jesus, it's like, where's the Elijah that came before the Messiah? And he's like, well, yes, Elijah did come before the Messiah.
Yeah.
That's St. John the Baptist. So if I ask you a question then, did Elijah come before the Messiah? The answer is yes.
100%.
There you go.
100%.
And so it's like, that's a different way of thinking than like this reductionist, like weird, it's like everything is just one-to-one in terms of this kind of strange reductionist reality. It's the different way of seeing the world.
Absolutely. And
it's more powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And it's more empowering.
Yeah, exactly.
And I firmly believe that I think we would be doing disfavor and harm to the church if what we are teaching those that we are responsible for to approach it in such a reductionist way.
Yeah.